everyone. Thank you for watching my presentation. In this project, we will propose a new method providing individual variable priority for precision insights. First, you might ask, what do you mean by individual importance? Well, when data come to us, the first model we learn from our statistics class is linear regression, where the slope coefficients can be served as a feature importance for the outcome. However, this kind of global importance can miss heterogeneity. For example, if we want to predict cardiovascular risk, it's easy to detect the well-known clinical variables such as age, cholesterol levels, smoking status, and so forth. However, it is entirely possible that for a specific patient, the elevated risk may be driven by a special or specific biomarker, and this biomarker may have very low global importance that we may miss. So for this kind of question, you can imagine a linear model is not an optimal choice because they often assume one equation fits everybody. So instead, we have to rely on artificial intelligence models, which are non-parametric, and they do not rely on a single fixed equation. But where does the intelligence come from? Well, both AI models are inspired by mimicking how humans handle problems. For example, on the left, we're basically mimicking how we process signals from the eye or from the ear, and those signals are transforming through layers and layers of neurons in our brain. And in this process, some of the signals are amplified, some of the signals are transformed, some of the signals are ignored, and in the end, we have conscious. And we can mimic this procedure mathematically through linear and nonlinear transformations of matrices in each layer. And after layers and layers, in the end, we can make a prediction. And this kind of neural net-based AI excel at analyzing language and image data. On the other hand, we have tree-based AI, which excel at analyzing structured data, like the kind we see in clinical data sets. Here, we don't mimic the biological structure of a human brain, we mimic the logic thinking of our brain. By thinking, we mean keeping asking questions in our brain. For example, if we want to decide whether to support a new hire, we might want to ask the year of experience, the GPA value, and the internship, and in the end, we kind of mapping this new candidate into some existing knowledge in our brain and make the decision. And mathematically, we can mimic this process through this binary tree, where each if-else question is represented as a splitting node. And by splitting node, we kind of building boundaries in the training data set. Then in the end, we have so-called terminal node shown in square, so that when a new data come, they are mapping into a terminal node, which is a neighborhood that in the training data set that is similar to the test data set, so data point, so that we can make a decision, make a prediction. And to me, the best part of tree-based AI is that they automatically, by design, they give us the neighborhood of a test data point. At this point, you might want to propose, okay, we already have the neighborhood of the test data, why don't we just fit a local linear regression so that for each individual we have slope coefficients, then we solve the problem. That is very good proposal, and that's exactly what we want to achieve. However, the challenge is that these terminal nodes are very tiny, and they only contain like less than 5 sample size, so it's almost impossible to get p inferences, because for each individual we have to provide p important scores for p features. So that's the challenge, and how we tackle this challenge I will explain in the next few slides. Before I introduce our model, let's give a formal definition of individual importance, which is defined as a local gradient of this function phi x on each dimension, and the phi x is the conditional expectation of the outcome under transformation phi. I use this notation phi to accommodate different kind of outcomes, such as not only just a regression type of outcome, but also classification, survival, competing risks. So in this talk, we won't use the word y hat, we will use the word the phi hat for the predicted outcome. Now we know the target, what we want to estimate. Let me introduce the idea of our iVarPro model. And because our idea is very smart and simple, so I can use one picture to explain everything of our method. First step, we have to grow a random forest model. And here you can imagine that it doesn't matter whether we have classification, survival, competing risks, regression type of outcome. We just go ahead and fit a random forest. And once I have this topology structure, we sampling the terminal nodes of these trees. And we call these terminal nodes local region R, shown in green. And I already mentioned that the challenge is that these terminal nodes are too small to get any inference. So here is a key innovation, the key idea of our iVarPro model is that for each rule region, for each feature S, we remove all the boundaries on feature S, so we expand this local region to include more sample. Okay, that's the whole idea. And in this 3D figure, the rule region is marked as the green box, a green cube in the middle. And for feature S, here S is x2. So to get the inference or importance score for x2, remove all the boundaries of this green cube along x2. Then we expand this green cube into a gray slab. Then we have more samples to fit a local linear regression, as I mentioned earlier. So here is the 3D plot, and here is a 2D figure for the same data. And I use the red color to mark the centroid of the rule. Here you can imagine that although we expanding the region and including more sample sets, we may include too many samples that we dilute the local structure of the rule. So we introduce this expansion parameter lambda. So when lambda has a larger value shown in this brown color, we will include more samples to fit the local linear regression. And when lambda have smaller value, we show in orange and yellow, we will include less samples to fit a local linear regression to get the slope coefficient as the importance score for feature S. Okay, that's all the idea of our iVarPro algorithm. The rest part of today's presentation is just some details. I already explained everything of our iVarPro method in one picture. Again, the first step to grow random forest trees, then we harvest the terminal nodes to obtain local regions. And for each region, for each dimension, we remove the boundaries to include more samples, and we fit a local linear regression to obtain the slope coefficient as the feature importance score. Okay, we are not the first to tackle this problem. There are existing methods. The first one is SHARP, where they don't work on neighborhood of the data point. They create a additive function to quantify the marginal effect of each feature. By marginal, they consider of all the combinations of subsets of features when they are added in the model. And the second method is called LAM, whose idea is similar to our iVarPro method, they also build the local linear regression, but instead of using tree structure neighborhood, they create an artificial data point by adding some distance for the test data point so that they can grow a local linear regression on this artificial neighborhood. And you can imagine that both methods heavily rely on a prediction model because they have to constantly obtain predicted values either for the fake data for live method or for the feature reduced data for the sharp method. On the other hand, our iVarPro method has the strength of model independent, where you can see that when we fit the local linear regression, we can just use the observed outcome to fit the local linear regression. Of course, we can use predicted outcome phi hat to fit the local linear regression, especially when our outcome is survival outcome. But we don't heavily rely on a prediction model. We don't predict anything beyond the trading data points. I mentioned the local linear regression earlier. Here is just the formal mathematical connection between the local gradient in the definition and the slope coefficient in local linear regression. First, we have to introduce this x0 notation, which is the centroid of root region R, and the local gradient is formally defined as this limit when a small value is added to the centroid, and this limit is exactly a slope. Then we can rewrite this function as a more like linear format so that we can introduce local linear regression later. Although our idea is smart and simple, however, many details matters in practice to make the idea work. So the first detail is to standardize the covariate, because we will have many rules for each data point, and we want to make the rules comparable, the slope coefficients comparable. So we introduce this expansion parameter lambda. So larger value correspond to a higher percentage of samples included from the release region. So here for the data points inside of region RS lambda, we standardize the observed covariate xi into zi around the centroid, and then we fit a local linear regression on the zi and obtain the slope coefficient. Another important detail is tuning the lambda parameter. Here we rely on cross-validate leave one out LOO predicted residual sum of squares price value, and basically we fit the linear regression under different value of lambda, and the optimal lambda is chosen as the one produces the smallest value in terms of price. In other words, we chose the local linear regression that gave us the best fit. Putting everything together, here is a pipeline of our iVarPro algorithm. Remember that when harvesting rules from the trees, we have many rules. So for case xi, we average the slope coefficients over all rules containing si. We designed 3 models to conduct a simulation study. In the first model, we have piecewise linear functions where in the area in the bottom, neither x1 nor x2 have a effect on the outcome, where the gradient of x1 only have a positive value at the upper right panel, and the gradients of x2 have different values depends on the top left or top right panel. And in the second model, we have quadratic function where inside of the radius, both S1 and S2 have a quadratic effect, and outside of this radius there's no effect of x1, x2, and x3 contain interaction term where the gradient of x1 depend on the value of x2 and vice versa. We compare our iVarPro algorithm to 3 established methods. The first one is called case-specific random forest, where for each test case they have a weighted vector attached to the training data points. They even use ordinary random forest permutation importance, they still have different importance score for each case because each case have different weights attached to the training data set. For Sharp and Lime, we use the XG boosting algorithm for their predictive function, and we have 4 versions of iVarPro. And the first one, the original iVarPro, is using the fathead from the random forest in the first step in the algorithm, and we also include iVarPro raw, where we use observed outcome to fit the local linear regression, and we also include the version where fathead is obtained from gradient tree boosting and SG boosting. We simulated both low and high dimensional data with small and large sample size under correlated and uncorrelated predictor scenarios. Because we simulated the data, we know the true gradient, so we can use ranking accuracy to evaluate the performance of different methods. We have Kendall-Stall, C-index, precision record, AUC. The first figure shows the simulation result in terms of Kendall-Stall. You can see that our 4 different versions of iVarPro outperform the other methods. Here is the result of C-index, and here is the result of in terms of PR AUC, and you can see that our iVarPro algorithm delivers strong and stable performance across correlations, dimensions, and sample sizes. We also present the MSE score contrasting the true gradient for the 4 versions of iVarPro. They work similarly, except in the correlated case, model 2, you can see the iVarPro raw version have higher MSE, meaning that when we use predicted outcome, we can gain some performance by smoothing the noise in the observed outcome. So far, we have an idea of the overall performance of all the methods through 1,000 replications. But let's look at one replication, one run of one dataset to see exactly what the output look like from these different methods. So here we use the example of model 2, where the function is quadratic, and the top row 2 figures shows the output from iVarPro, which generally recovers the true structure of the gradient, where the other 3 methods do not recover the true structure of the gradient. And on the left, we show the true gradient of from the true simulation function, and here we have the on top we have the true gradient from the observed data, shown in black dot, and we also have these black boxes showing the boundaries of the rule regions. And on the bottom, we have the output from iVarPro. You can see that iVarPro basically recover the structure of the true gradient, and we have the same conclusion when the features are correlated. We also design a simulated survival dataset, and here is the function generating the true survival time, and for the phi function we use restricted mean survival time RMST, which is the integral of the survival function. And once we have this phi x function, we can take the partial derivative to provide the true gradient, and you can see that X1 to X4 are not interesting because they have the same gradient for every individual, and X5 is kind of interesting because X5 only have effect when X2 is larger than 0.5. We simulated 15 noise variable and random censoring at a 25% rate. Here is the output of iVarPro. You can see that the result is satisfactory. For the X1 to X4, the importance score is kind of flat, but for X5, X5 only have a gradient or only importance when the value of X2 is larger than 0.5. Last but not least, we applied our iVarPro method to a real-world dataset. In this study, we have around 19,000 patients who underwent treadmill exercise testing for the evaluation of suspected coronary artery disease. The outcome is all-cause mortality, and we use integrated cumulative hazard as a function phi, which is estimated through random survival for risk. After running the iVarPro algorithm, we found that globally, peak mass and Duke treadmill score DTS are important, and our iVarPro method found that ECG features has localized importance, which I will show in the next figure. Here, we have this kind of sort of scatter plot where each data point represents a patient, and we stratify the patient into 4 groups according to their risk level. So patients on the left have lower risk and patients on the right have higher risk. And each data point is one patient, and they are positioned horizontally according to their peak mass value, and they are positioned vertically according to their ST segment. And the size of the circle is the feature important score. So the size of the circle at the 4 top panels is skewed to the estimated gradient of peak mass, the important score of peak mass. And you can see that the gradient increases as the risk increases, and the gradient is especially large when the patient have the high risk and with low value of peak mass. For the bottom 4 panels, the patient is laid out in the same way, but the size of the circle is skewed to the gradient of ST segment. Basically, it's skewed to the importance of ST segment. And we have similar conclusion that the gradient increases as the risk increases, but the elevated gradient only shown at a medium level of peak mass, meaning that ST segment is more has more pronounced effect for moderate performers over those at extremes. On the right, we have similar figures laid out the similar way, but on the vertical position, the variable is no longer displayed for ST segment. Here, what display in the vertical axis is DTS score, Duke treadmill score, and again in the top 4 panels, the size of the circle is skewed to the estimated gradient of peak mass, the importance of peak mass, and you can see that the gradient increases as risk increases, and the gradient also increases vertically as the DTS score increases. And for the 4 figures at the bottom, we can see that the data points are displayed in the same way, but the size of the circle is skewed to the estimated gradient of DTS score, where you can see that DTS gradient increases as the risk increases, and the gradient is especially large when the peak mass value is at a small to medium level. We also examined the Kaplan-Meier survival curve. We stratify patients into different levels of peak mass and mortality. And on the top three figures, the color shows the levels of ST segment. And you can see that ST segment have pronounced effect in the first and third figure, but the effect is not so pronounced in the figure in the middle, where patients have low peak mass value and a high mortality level. In the bottom, the figure is displayed the same way, but the color shows different levels of DTS score. And we have similar conclusion of DTS score, but overall the effect of DTS is weaker than the effect of ST segment. As a summary, our iVarPro method uses local gradient to define individualized importance score for each feature. And by harvesting rules from random forest trees and expanding the rules into release regions, we are able to recover data-grounded insights into what exactly drives the outcome for each individual. And our method is very useful for precision decision, especially personalized medicine. And here is our publication, and my slides is available at my GitHub. Looking forward, we want to expand the current iVarPro framework to accommodate time-varying and longitudinal data. Our software is available through GitHub R package, and you can also explore our interactive vignettes and examples through our project website listed at the bottom of today's slide. Thank you very much for watching.